Hello, my name is Tracy Truex, and I am presenting my action research analysis in this presentation. The purpose of my research was to investigate the levels of student motivation in a remote learning environment because I've been teaching remote since the beginning of the school year. So I was really looking to maybe see if I could identify correlations and patterns that might explain levels of engagement in my class, and then use the data that I collect to make instructional adjustments to try and increase student levels of motivation. That's kind of the plan. Now, my problem statement was actually born from the Zoom room. So we have Zoom synchronous sessions for block scheduled at my blocks. We have block scheduling at my school, and we use Zoom for synchronous sessions in a remote learning environment. And if you look at the picture up on the screen right there, that's essentially my life on a daily basis. So I don't see my students. So a lot of my students are cameras off, mics off, and we can't force kids to turn their cameras on for a variety of social and emotional reasons. But ultimately, it's been a challenge to see if students are truly engaged both inside and outside of the classroom. Particularly when it comes to the class that I chose to focus my research on, not engaging in activities outside of class means that during class is less effective. And what I realized through this process is that I really relied on non-verbal cues to identify student engagement and motivation and learning in my class, things like facial expressions and body language and peering over students' shoulders to kind of eyeball what it is that they were doing, and getting students motivated by physical location in the room where I move my body in order to control or manage behavior in my class. And I don't have any of that as an option in a Zoom room. And so I really started wondering, like, are kids even there? So that was sort of the the idea behind why I wanted to look at student engagement. I like this quote too because this is something that I believe that to be true, and that is individuals need to be willing to participate in the learning process. They need to be motivated and use learning strategies because if they're not able to do this, and I'm paraphrasing here, that will impact their current and future success. And I started wondering if students even had the strategies to do online learning well. Just lots of questions. But I narrowed it down to two. So the two research questions that I'm looking at, the first one is, how does a remote learning environment impact student engagement? And in what ways can teachers adjust instructional strategies to promote engagement in a remote or hybrid concurrent learning environment, which is what we're doing right now, but I am still teaching remote, so my situation didn't really change that much. So I looked at three different peer-reviewed literature articles on the topic, and each bullet point represents something that I found to be most interesting about the article itself. So the first article, I learned that students demonstrate higher level of performance when online classes are highly interactive. Um, the second article talked about building relationships and how that's still really critical to student motivation and engagement, but requires caution because, of course, like peer-to-peer relationships are really positive and can be highly motivating, but they can also be a little bit demotivating, especially if there's any sort of online bullying occurring or putting together students that naturally just don't get along. And so it requires a little bit of detective work on the teacher in order to create effective groupings. And then finally, e-learning readiness is most dependent upon self-directed learning and intrinsic motivation. This was the third article, and this article was probably the most helpful for me because I designed my entire student learning survey based on trying to figure out how ready my students were for e-learning. And so a lot of the questions had to do with self-direction, intrinsic motivation, self-efficacy, and executive functioning skills. So methods and data collection. So I planned on collecting descriptive data because that's what I was looking for to describe what was actually happening in my class. My focus group was ninth and 10th graders in an AP Human Geography class, and almost all of the data I collected was quantitative. And I chose this group because of the level of work and rigor involved in the class. Like, this is a class where I do not get to question the content because the content comes from College Board, and unless College Board changes it, I need to teach it because I have to get kids ready for a test that they're taking in May. And so I needed to really figure out how to get students to engage in content outside of the class in order for me to facilitate activities that promote their understanding and application of that content. So I collected data from 3 different sources. I used a flipped classroom lectures, and I used Edpuzzle because Edpuzzle tracks how much time students spend. If they completed the lecture. It shows you how many times they rewind to look at different sections, and all of this gives me information on how students are either passively or actively listening. I created a survey, and then the final data collection was a multiple choice objective progress test just to see how my students were learning the content. So in terms of the Edpuzzle lecture, a couple of data points that stood out to me were that 24% completed lectures prior to synchronous sessions. That means only 24% of the students were actually ready for the learning that happened when I saw them face-to-face, Zoom face-to-face. There was 43% total completion, but this indicated that some students were actually watching the lecture after the fact, and I wonder how much or how effective in-class activities were. They were missing the purpose of the activity. 13% of the 58 kids that I have been tracking missed at least one lecture, but most missed more. And then 91 other data point that stuck out was that when given class time, I had a 90% completion rate on that Edpuzzle, which makes me wonder, what were the other 10% doing? But I'll take it. Then with the survey, just a couple of images so you can kind of take a look at some of the questions that I was asking. So I was looking for how well students engaged based on how much time I was asking them to engage in certain activities. And as you can see up here, there was about 58% of the students that said they struggled to maintain focus on activities that were too long outside of class, that was reading and or Edpuzzle lectures. This one I thought was interesting too. And by the way, 4 is strongly agree, 3 agree, 2 disagree, and 1 strongly disagree. Nothing in the center here. I wanted to make sure that students were actually choosing a side. So I thought this point was interesting too. When I struggle with something, I feel like I can identify what's wrong. So there were about 25% of the students that didn't even know why they were struggling. So I thought that this was something that I wanted to explore a little bit further. Again, with the whole focus and long, this is specifically related to learning target lectures. So 38, 59%, almost 60% of the students said that if lectures are too long, they kind of stop learning, they sort of tune the lecture out, which is absolutely what I don't want. And when I asked students to tell me about how long they thought was ideal for lectures, 66% said between 10 and 15 minutes. And then finally, this one I thought was interesting as well. So 38, so about a little over 60% said that remote learning has actually made things more challenging for them. So it requires maybe some consideration on my part as to how I'm expecting students to learn in this environment. The progress checks correlations were a little bit hard to identify. There seemed to be no general correlations at all until I broke down the data by using the survey as well. And what I found was that 91% of students who earned less than 70% on average on those multiple choice progress checks agreed that longer lectures negatively impacted their learning. And then all students earning higher than an 80% demonstrated high levels of self-directed learning and executive functioning skills. So I kind of combined the two data points there. Now, in terms of action plans and objectives, so of course I want to increase levels of engagement on asynchronous work, including both flipped classroom lectures and learning target, multiple choice progress checks. This is where things get a little bit tricky because I had identified problems with the data collection in general because I collected all of the data asynchronously. And so with students that were lacking engagement already, so I just have no data on some of my kids. And so that made me think that I might need to adjust a little bit and create some targeted time to meet with students who lack levels of engagement. We have office hours for all of our classes and students are invited, but it's not really optional. And I wanted to include the parents in that communication as well. So if you get an invitation to attend an office hour, it means you need to go because there are some problems. And then in terms of just general reflections on the whole process, this seems to be something that teachers tend to naturally do anyway, but just now we have a name for it called action research. I would argue that lots of teachers use inquiry to seek answers to classroom-based problems. Where I found value in this assignment was allowing the data to drive decision making, which is something I think is actually really important. And I think all of this is just really good teaching. So there's my 2 cents on the topic. Thanks for listening, everybody. I don't know if I can make this thing turn off.